On January 30th, 2007, it was reported that a man in Casper, Wyoming accidentally discharged his pistol, with the bullet nicking his own arm before striking a man who was using the bathroom in a nearby building. As the bullet had traveled through 2 walls, across a courtyard, and ricocheted off a shower wall, it left only a small bruise on the chest of the second man, and no medical treatment was required. A local police sergeant was quoted as saying the accident was one of those freak happenings. 2,000 miles away in East Hartford, Connecticut, it was reported that Emma Faust Tillman, the oldest human being on Earth, had died at 114 years old. This is What a Year. Welcome to What a Year, the show where we pick a year and spend 10 episodes assembling a time capsule of movies, music, and other cultural odds and ends. I'm Ethan Warren.
And I'm Ryan Pollie.
And today we are going to talk about our first contributions to our 2007 time capsule, which are going to be Wes Anderson's The Darjeeling Limited and Panda Bear's album Person Pitch. And plus I will be testing Ryan's ability to tell fact from fiction. And then if you stick around until the end, we are going to have a contribution to our time capsule from Polygon TV editor Zosha Millman. Ryan, I have known you for 15 years, and I would love to finally learn who you are. Can you tell me anything about yourself?
Yeah, okay, I can. My name's Ryan. Ethan and I met in Maine. We went to school together. One of those years was 2007, which is the subject of this show. And I am a musician and producer of music in Eagle Rock, California, which is basically Los Angeles, California.
And basically as far away as you can get from Maine and Massachusetts, which is where I lived, which is relatively close to Maine. So it's rude that you went that far away. And when you are an essential human being in my life. So that is the not so secret purpose of this show is just for these two guys who have known each other since 2007 to talk about how 2007 was the best and indisputably better than 2022. We're only a few days into it, but 2007 was so much better than what we're in right now. And that's the other not so secret subject here.
Yeah.
Remember when it wasn't 2022?
It's just that, like, time is crazy. And the fact that 2007 was as long ago as it is pretty wild. You know what I mean? Because it feels like modern music. It feels like modern film. It feels in no way does this feel like we're talking about classic rock. But it's approaching like, yeah, a different time, a different culture, a different time for music and movies, which is pretty crazy.
Let's just do the quick check here. We are looking back 15 years from 2022 to 2007. So that's the equivalent of looking back to 1992 from 2007, which felt like, ancient history, certainly.
Yeah, that's true. It's just crazy. It's just crazy to me because, these records and these movies feel like, I don't know. They don't feel like that long ago to me.
No, they came out yesterday, obviously. And yet at the same time,
it was so long ago.
The kids who were born when these things came out are 15 and have their own perspective on Wes Anderson and these movies that came out before they were born.
Mm-hmm.
So this is, again, just two guys yelling about how it's weird that they're older than they used to be. Well, I'd love to introduce myself too, which I haven't gotten to do. We've known each other 15 years, and I'd love to tell you that I'm Ethan Warren, and I am an editor-at-large for Bright Wall Dark Room and the author of the book Paul Thomas Anderson. That's not what it's called. It's called The Cinema of Paul Thomas Anderson, American Apocrypha, which is not out yet, but will be closer to being out by the time that you are hearing this. So hopefully we're warming up into that.
Is it really coming that soon?
Oh, well, the idea is that the book will be in stores for Christmas shopping 2022, holiday shopping 2022, pardon me.
That's insane. I guess I didn't realize this year was the year. This is it's
a little insane.
That's amazing. Congratulations. Yeah. And I'm sorry for not
thank you
for not doing such a nice segue for your introduction.
we got to get these things out of the way because we have so much to talk about 2007.
It's true.
So I feel like we should talk a little bit about like why this is the format and why this is the year. But to begin with, I mean, this show is not always going to be about 2007. The idea is that we will 10 episodes at a time pick a year and sort of build this time capsule. And so why is it that we chose this format? Do you have a perspective on that for our lovely audience?
Well, I have always enjoyed the fact that movies and just media in general, but specifically movies, have been something that we've connected on, and I've texted you about every single thing I've digested like throughout our friendship, and it's something that's anchored this casual form of communication where we laugh about movies and we talk about movies and we talk about actors and we talk about movie news and stuff in this very like let's be pretentious just to each other way that makes it really fun and not pretentious because we can go hard on a take, but because with the safety of knowing it's just going to stay in our little text thread. So I don't know.
I hate to break it to you. I am pretentious to everybody in all walks of my life. I'm glad you think it's only with me, and I'm glad that you're only like that with me because I'm a lot.
But I think also like I think come to me in similar ways about music. Like if I would imagine if you fell in love with a new Bruce record, you'd text me about it. You know what I mean? Like, or something like that. Like if you like fell head over heels for a new band or something, I think you'd let me know. So speaking
of, it's not as the past as it used to be. The idea of falling in love with a new Bruce Springsteen record in 2022 is a very alien concept. I might fall in love with The River for the first time. You know, what is it about 2007 that we gravitated to it? It wasn't just that it is when we met, which is kind of fun. But it's not just that things were better than the old days. This is a year I know on, you know, I find really interesting as sort of a cultural shift point. Do you have any insight on why this is the year we went to?
Yes. I think that besides like a couple other points of my life, I think this is the pinnacle of feeling like alive and present for modern, the most exciting point for me for modern music, I guess is what I'm saying. Like, obviously discovering classic rock in high school was amazing, or like, but it reminded me of like going to the store to buy the new Blink-182 CD, like the waiting up for the review of In Rainbows and like downloading and seeing like what a FLAC file was for the first time, and like. And Animal Collective, seeing them live before they had released Merriweather. The idea of that is just so exciting to me. The bands that we're about to talk about, they were probably younger than I am now, or around my age, making music for me as a college kid that was opening my mind to a lot of influences I had never heard of. So it was pointing me backwards in a really important way to bands that I didn't know. But it was also this just really forward-thinking indie experimentation, cool. Like the song was really important, but the sound was really important at the same time. A lot of these records like are really production-wise very interesting, and I don't know if that's the same as movies, but yeah, that's what it felt like for me. It felt like at the time I was like, holy shit, music is crazy right now. It's so good. You know, it's so good, which is funny because we'll talk about this Guardian article that came out that was like, is 2007 the worst year ever for music, especially indie music? I think it was about indie specifically, but obviously the answer is no, and we'll find out why. But tell me, what is 2007 in movies? Why that year?
So there's a few different things, and the term indie is a significant one, but I want to maybe lead up to that. So for one thing, it's the tail end of the Bush era. We're gearing up into the election that is going to determine, what the next presidential administration is going to be. And we're looking back at 8 years of George Bush, and you're starting to see that kind of emerge in ways that aren't necessarily super direct, which is what I think is most interesting about this year. Movies that we're not going to talk about, like There Will Be Blood and No Country for Old Men, are both very much read as these allegories for the sort of exhaustion at the end of that administration and the looking back in There Will Be Blood to sort of say, what is the lineage of There Will Be Blood? You can read as an allegory for the Iraq War and the sort of prequel to that whole conflict. So you're starting to see that emerge in ways that I think are intriguing. It's also the last year before Iron Man and The Dark Knight, and 2008 is going to change everything. We are so living in the post 2008 world where those two movies just rearranged kind of the business model. And if you look at 2007, you see a lot more chaos than you're going to see going forward. You see less and less chaos until, you just have the Letterboxd most watched list is all just going to be Marvel and Disney properties pretty soon. But right now it's we have Transformers, we have B-Movie, we have National Treasure, a Die Hard sequel, Rob Zombie's Halloween, just all this random shit that is going to be kind of sanded away and siphoned away over the next 15 years. Yeah. And then in terms of the indie stuff, it's now 10 years since the indie boom of the sort of Sundance generation, the Sundance kids, the rebels on the backlot, which are all different ways of talking about the guys, and it was mostly guys, that emerged in that very sort of fertile indie landscape of the mid-90s when Pulp Fiction had kind of rewritten the rules on what could be commercially viable, and all of a sudden guys like Paul Thomas Anderson and Todd Haynes and Harmony Korine and Wes Anderson step in and sort of say, oh, you're handing checks to weird guys with weird visions. I'll take one. It's a little more complicated than that, but for the sake of the story, we'll say that's what it was like. And those guys, all of their, I think it is becoming more and more clear now by 2022, and is starting to emerge in 2007, that these guys, and again, it is mostly guys, give or take.
Same over here. Yeah.
Yeah. Give or take. Sofia Coppola, Kimberly Pierce are usually in that crowd. You're now seeing them in 2007 kind of become a product of their time almost already. These are Clinton era filmmakers, and they still are through and through. And I will get into that a little bit with Wes Anderson. These guys are now at the 10-year anniversary, the decade of their emergence, and they each start hitting kind of a turning point, I think. Wes Anderson, we'll talk about Darjeeling Limited in just a minute, but this is the last movie he makes it set in the present so far ever. He has not made a movie set in the present since 2007. Neither is Quentin Tarantino. Paul Thomas Anderson hasn't since 2002. A lot of these guys are starting to say, where am I after a decade? And looking backwards, which I think is really interesting, but not yet. Because first we have Darjeeling Limited, and for Tarantino we have Death Proof. So
that is fascinating. I've never thought about placing this. Yeah, it's weird. My brain doesn't work like that. Like I haven't placed these albums quite yet culturally. You know what I mean? Like it's I know individually what they were to me and why I love them, but it's fascinating to look at film in the way that you look at it as kind of this, that there are these cultural shifts going on, and it's really cool to hear. I mean, that is just wild to hear that, like, yeah, what is that psychological study of all those directors just deciding to stop making movies in the present? That's pretty wild. There could be a whole thing on that. Yeah.
Well, Paul Thomas Anderson has been talking about it just recently on the Licorice Pizza press tour. He characterized the modern world as this cannonball that is dragging us all down. They don't want to make movies with cell phones in them. They want to make movies in a world before cell phones, which
I get it.
Paul Thomas Anderson very directly has said is the thing that is a chain around our modern selves.
we just saw Company, the Sondheim revival in New York, and it was set modern day. And they're big, they're bold. The whole thing was, look, cell phones. And that was interesting that you bring that up, because that was the biggest thing they added to Company, besides it being gender swapped, was it's a tech cell phone thing.
The gender swap thing is a big ad. That's a big change.
Yeah, the cell phones I thought was pretty big.
Cell phones are also big. I'm not going to be able to go toe to toe with you on Sondheim. Maybe I can up my Sondheim awareness over the
You're
course
gonna
of this.
the listeners are just gonna hear my insecurities pop out, because every time you sound intelligent, I'm gonna have to talk about something you don't know about, just so I can again just that was very lovely to hear about. What about you in 2000? I talked a little bit about like being young and loving the music, but what about you in 2007 in these movies? You were in love with movies in the same way that you are now in 2007.
Kind of. I was just getting into movies in 2007.
Really?
I was just getting deep into it. I knew that. I mean, I've been obsessed with movies since I was a kid. I have a 3-year-old son right now, and he's gonna remain my son for the foreseeable future, but he won't be 3 forever. So right now, I have a 3-year-old son who once very recently snapped at me and said, "I'm gonna go in the TV room where I belong." And I was like, "Yeah, that's me.
Yeah,
that's just my mini me."
Yeah.
So I've been obsessed with movies. Yeah. But 2007, I took my first class at Bates College, where you and I met.
Cool.
I took my first film course called Godard in European Film, and we started with Rebel Without a Cause, and then every week after that, paired a Godard movie with something else, an Antonioni movie or
awesome
Bergman movie. It was amazing, and we wrote papers on them, and that was really my sort of origin story for where I still am now. So these movies are kind of locked in that place.
Like an analytical place? Or did this open you up to just fall in love with filmmaking more so than just appreciating it as a journey, as part of, an audience member, like when you started taking things seriously in 2007, what does that mean exactly? Like, how does that change your relationship with movies?
Well, these movies, I'm looking at the Letterboxd sort of most popular array right now. These all really fade into the background for me when I think about like movies in me in 2007, because I'm for the first time really getting into the Criterion Collection, which is this sort of semi-problematic institution that is also the most incredible film school to kids like me who didn't have a film program at their school. And we had this great professor, shout out Steve Dillon, who guided us through and showed us, Godard's Weekend, and said, this is the shot that Wes Anderson is stealing again and again. You saw so much Wes Anderson in that goddamn European film class. It's so funny. Yeah. Now that I think back on it. And so that's when I was getting activated this year. It's almost separate from the 2007 of it all. Yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense, actually. It's almost like musically, I could say that would be like me figuring out like classic rock and the Beatles, while there was also really good shit coming out modern. But it was like, oh my god! But give me a second, I'm falling in love with the Beatles for the first time, kind of deal. Which is fascinating, because I don't think I knew what the Criterion Collection was, and I didn't go to class all the time, and I didn't watch all the movies. But when I went to Ireland, I took a film class the next year, and we did. That's where I first saw Godard, and that's where I first, that's where I fell in love with Underground. Remember that Costa Rica, right? Am I saying that right?
No idea what you're talking about.
It's like this Hungarian film about like pre-war Yugoslavia, and then the Marlon Brando butter anal one. What's that one?
The Last Tango in Paris.
Yeah,
I believe is the title.
We did that one.
Sure.
Yeah, so that hey, look, I got into European cinema in college too, but I didn't fall in love with it. I was kind of like, this is a class to take.
And sort of a relatively easy class, because you get to watch movies instead of learning science, which is like, I don't know why anybody would take the other path.
All right, during the break, we've debated whether or not I should start or you should start. And I think that I'm going to say a couple things about this film as more of the layman. I think that this film, I know that Royal Tenenbaums and Life Aquatic like made me cry, and were just like made me fall in love with Wes Anderson. And then I saw Rushmore and I liked it, and I saw Darjeeling and I liked it fine. And and that's kind of what I remembered, and I remember you loving it, and it's such a great film, and it's so well made, and the acting's so good, and the script is so funny, but I remember I used to just think that it was just like these bad men being bad to each other, being bad brothers, and just like being passive aggressive, and I don't know, it's like watching the first episode of the Beatles documentary. Like it's good, but I don't think I want to be in that room for that long. And
is that still how you feel?
Well,
because a peek behind the curtain, I absolutely adore this movie. And I just still remember you snapping at me, I don't like any of these men. Which is fair and kind of beside the point for me. And I'm curious
I know.
You.
It's not the point. It's not, you can enjoy a movie with it not being, that not being.
Well, blah, blah, blah. You can do a lot of things, but what do you think?
I think it's a good film. I think it's entertaining. And I would recommend a bunch of others of his before this one, because I think ultimately these people their redemption lies in a child dying and them like kind of bonding together through this poor kid's death, and like what do they really learn except how to treat each other a little bit nicer after they, like, as adults realize that their mom's shitty too, and like their dad's material things don't mean anything to them, so like they only have each other, and that's lovely. But do I really believe that Darjeeling Limited 2 is them being nice to each other and like all like being in each other's lives? No, I think these are shitty people, and they're gonna revert to being shitty to each other after this as well, and that bums me out. So this movie, 10 out of 10, it bums me out.
10 out of 10 bummers.
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty great little like statement of purpose for this. I think you kind of got most of it in there, so we can kind of move on. You want to talk about person pitch? We should probably talk about this a little bit more.
What about you talking about this movie?
Well, that's a terrific idea, I think. So this movie is, let's count them out. This is the 5th movie by Wes Anderson. Let's just talk about that a little bit, and then I'll tell you how I feel about the 5th movie by Wes Anderson. Am I right there? Wes Anderson's kind of emerged onto the scene in the 90s. He didn't exactly explode onto the scene, but he emerged with this little indie Bottle Rocket. Then Rushmore is really the one that made his name. Then we have Royal Tenenbaums, very much the movie that turned him into a brand. Then we have The Life Aquatic, the movie where that brand, all of a sudden, everybody said, we don't like this anymore, fuck you. And Darjeeling Limited, the movie where he said, oh my God, what? Okay, fine. How about this then? That's kind of the story of his career in 5 movies. It's really fascinating to me how kind of abrupt it was. And that is one of the things that I really love about this movie. I think it is very much a response to the way people talked about Life Aquatic. But maybe we should just run through his career a little bit real quick, just to roll into this, because I think it is an auteurist work on that, in that way. Have you seen Bottle Rocket? Do you have Bottle Rocket takes?
Pass.
Haven't seen it?
No, I've seen it.
Yeah, pass. Same. I don't really.
It's fine.
It's fine. It's something that we'll talk about, and is kind of my major thing with Wes Anderson is the balance between kind of the real and the artificial.
Sure. Is
really essential for me and how I feel about his movies. It's almost no artificial in that one.
Yeah,
it's very true. It's
not fantasy. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a low budget indie movie.
Sure. And it's funny. It's funny.
It's funny. It's lazy. Or it's got a sort of slow energy, very slacker chords, and it is in kind of that tradition. It's a Texas movie if you think about it. It's a Texas movie, and it's
sure.
Later it's a New York movie, and it's an ocean movie, and it's an India movie. So it's him a little bit more in his backyard than Rushmore.
But I know people who rate that movie who are like, that's my number one movie.
Well, then those people are weird, and they shouldn't say that.
I agree. I feel like it's like I don't know. It's like oh, like you love Chris Nolan, you should watch that like black and white.
Following. Yeah,
it's like I guess.
What's your favorite Paul Thomas Anderson? Oh, Hard Eight. Fuck off.
Yeah, it's like why don't you let him become the person that he becomes before you start loving it? But
you can like whatever you like, but if Hard Eight is your favorite
Paul
Paul Thomas Anderson, you're just trying to make a point.
Yeah, I don't even know what that movie is.
Well, it's pretty good.
Yeah. Okay,
yeah,
cool.
It is. It's all right. You should check it out. So Rushmore then is the movie that puts him more on the map, and you crank up the artifice a little bit more. Still very much a naturalistic movie, but his style is starting to emerge, and some of his real sort of thematic fascinations, like terrible fathers and
Bill Murray
and pretentious young people and kids who grow up too fast. And
yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah,
that's a good one. Yeah, children acting like adults. Moonrise Kingdom. It's crazy. Yeah.
There's a quote that I'd love to read that I knew I was going to get to at some point, but we'll just get it out here. So Michael Chabon, the novelist, wrote a introduction to the Wes Anderson collection, which is an amazing book-length interview and coffee table book by Matt Zoller Seitz and Wes Anderson in conversation. And Chabon basically said that Wes Anderson's work is defined by the understanding that the world has been broken for as long as anyone can remember, and our need to reconcile this fact with the ache of cosmic nostalgia, an intimation of vanished glory, of lost wholeness, a memory of the world unbroken. The question becomes, what do we do with the pieces?
Is that post Darjeeling, Wes? Though, right?
It is, but I also think it applies more to because you can kind of carve his career into different phases, and this idea that there's this aching nostalgia. I almost said horrible nostalgia, and maybe it is a horrible aching nostalgia for a time when things were better, or a time when we could have taken a better path personally.
And that we could come back to that with Person Pitch too. I mean, because it's so sample heavy, and it's this music that is grounded in this nostalgic place. It's like, it sounds like my dad's listening to records in the other room type of thing. And like that kind of, and also I think it's such a prime example of musical tourism in a way that like Astral Weeks is, or something, like where you can go escape to Person Pitch for a little while and like take a vacation there and then come back to your day in ways that many albums don't do as effectively. So I think this whole idea of creating a new world for somebody to visit, like, and like that world being grounded in nostalgia, like I think is definitely a relating point between the two projects we're talking about.
That's fantastic. Well, because and so much of Anderson's stuff is he is a sample artist too. He is using Godard in the case of Darjeeling Limited. He's using Satyajit Ray, and he's using I think is it Jean Renoir who did The River. We'll check in on that later. Find out if I got that right, the director of The River. And he is taking these old things, and he's sampling them, and that is important. It is not necessarily still in the whole like creating an it is. He's creating an alternate world in this sort of dollhouse universe, which some people find so grating and so kind of twee.
Oh, it's so wonderful.
But it is wonderful because I think
it can be exhausting. I've been there when I've been like, oh, this is so Wes Anderson, but not. I didn't have that experience last night.
That's important to this movie.
I didn't have that experience. I loved the luggage, like not what the luggage does in the movie. I don't like that, but I like the luggage print. I like the way things look. I love the little tiny cute little bus stop or the train stop. I love like all his mind and the way aesthetically his mind works. Like, design an apartment for me anytime. Love his worlds.
Sure, but his worlds are not just worlds, but they are worlds because they have this emotional undercurrent of loss, of think about Max Fisher in Rushmore. His mother is dead, and that loss motivates everything. The same with Chaz's wife in Royal Tenenbaums. There is this loss and this once upon a time I was happy, and once upon a time, if I had made different choices, I could have been happier. Steve Zissou, the human embodiment of just just bitter, horrible regret. And it's interesting now that I think about it. Darjeeling Limited happens, which is all of this happening again. Fantastic Mr. Fox happens and kind of takes it to its breaking point, this issue of the Andersonian man as a figure who is worth considering. And then he shifts to these ensemble stories set in the past after that are more about greater social and cultural themes. So this is towards the end of him being obsessed with just what happens inside one dude's brain, or three dudes' brains in the case of this movie.
I mean, to me, this is where does this rate in your Wes Andersons?
Well, goodness gracious, high. This movie rates really, really high
and
for me.
How could it?
Yeah.
Like, how? That's what I want to know. Is like where I struggle to connect to this film. And you know, like, because to me, I can appreciate so many things about a film, right? But when it comes down to it, if I appreciate something on an emotionally resonant level, it can be a bad movie in every other way. Like, it trumps everything for me. Like, the emotional resonance, the character development, who these people are in the story is by far, to me, the most valuable thing of a film. So even though it's a Wes Anderson film, the script is brilliant, the acting is brilliant, the story's great, you know, like, everything's in its place. How could this story resonate strongly with you to the point where you would rate it high in his canon, when there are films that offer you catharsis and redemption and these legendary tales, and then there's this story of these three brothers who like just have been shitty for a really long time? You know, like where do you get off?
That's a great question, because it has multiple meanings.
Yeah.
Well, the answer is I get off on the first moments of this movie. I get everything I need from this movie in the first 5 minutes.
Why? Because it ends with the ending of another movie?
Pardon me? What are you... the Bill Murray thing?
Yeah, I feel like the beginning it's the only movie I can remember where it like begins with the last scene of a film, kind of. Like, it's like almost like the credits are, there's even slow motion. I feel like they're about to say goodbye, and I've known these characters for a while, and I've just watched a movie about Bill Murray, and the last scene is he misses the train. It was very strange. It was almost jarring. Sure. I forgot about that scene.
So for the listener, it's the movie opens with Bill Murray as a businessman in India who is in what's called an auto rickshaw, a little taxi being driven to a train station, and he's in a hurry and he's missing his train, and he doesn't have a name. And some people believe that it's a misdirect, and maybe we're supposed to believe this is the father of the boys who we haven't even met yet. So I don't really know how that would function.
I think it's also a misdirect in that he's going to be a main character, because Bill Murray has now become a staple of Wes Anderson. And so everybody's seeing this film being like, yay, Bill Murray. And I think it's a big, like, kind of not middle finger, but kind of like, gotcha. Like, Bill is actually not really in this movie. You know, like, I think that's kind of cool.
I would go farther and say it's an active statement that says this is not going to be like my last three movies.
Interesting. Because Bill is the star of Life Aquatic. That's interesting.
Yeah. It's only 3 movies, but it had become a pretty oppressive
is it what? It's those three, Rushmore, Royal, and yeah, because I guess he's the main character, if not the second lead of all of those.
He's more in the ensemble of Tenenbaums, but he's Wes Anderson is the guy. This is pre-Lost in Translation. He's the guy who found Bill Murray again,
that's interesting.
Gave him this whole different moment in his career. And I think this is a movie that is so in opposition to the reputation that he had gained. Because one thing is there is this huge steep jump in how sort of overproduced and over art directed his movies are. Rushmore basically takes place in the real world. Royal Tenenbaum is this kind of uncanny, they're using some natural locations, some, real streets, but
it's
a lot of it's
like an
directed.
Affluent New York family joke type of, like, it's like a satire reality kind of.
Right, but he's building some of his own sets, and then by the time of Life Aquatic, he's building a whole ship
sick
and submarine that is
cool,
cut in half, and people are getting a little pissed off. And those people are wrong. I love Life Aquatic. But some of the reviews at the time are like, okay, he's getting overwhelming in how art directed these things are. There's no humanity in his movies anymore already. I know. I'm
I
with you.
think
But
Life Aquatic might have the most humanity in any of his films.
I don't know if I can completely agree, but it is there in a way that people did not at the time care to recognize. And so this movie is him trying to say, okay, I'm going to work without the art direction. I have built a train, which is a huge art direction, but he is moving into the real world in the most sort of the way that he can never really art direct or direct these scenes where the characters are walking through a market. And there is some sort of questionable factor, as you have alluded to, the sort of tourism factor of this movie. Wes Anderson dropped his little art-directed boys into a scene that is non-white and non-affluent just to sort of play on the sight gag of that image. But I think the intent is there to say, I am gonna try and take my thing, my little action figure boys, and take them out of the dollhouse and put them into a world that I can't micromanage and just see what happens and let that breathe. He has described this, I think, in the Matt Zoller Seitz book as his Robert Altman movie, which is a hilarious concept. This is a quote from the Wes Anderson collection by Matt Zoller Seitz. Anderson says, I feel like Robert Altman's whole wonderful system is built in part on the basis of, okay, let's create a framework for the thing to spontaneously happen. And Anderson acknowledges, I don't have that kind of a feeling of freedom in my approach. I'd like to, but nevertheless, he is someone that I admire so much, and I want to imitate to the degree that I can find a way to incorporate this approach into my own sort of pretty rigid framework. And so Altman is a guy who he, as Anderson says, built a framework and then really let his actors loose to improvise, and the camera would kind of
a real Adam McKay type of character, huh?
Oh, that I need like
really,
10 minutes
really
to recover
lets
from
things
that.
stretch, you know?
Oh my goodness, Robert Altman is definitely the Adam McKay of his day. That's what we'd say.
And dare I say that Wes Anderson maybe took his little Altman approach and it did not work as well? I mean, I think those characters don't perform well in the real world. I think even they don't perform well in the real world in the script. I mean, these characters are like his dolls fall apart a little bit when they're not in their dollhouse.
Well, I think it's kind of the fact that Anderson can't really let go. I read the script along with the movie for a while until it became clear that the script is the movie. He didn't really have those guys improvise in those scenes. They had their dialogue, and they just sort of bounced their dialogue off of these other people.
Sure. I think the control is what makes it good for him, maybe.
Yeah. Well, but then on the other hand, I am not somebody who is super in love with this recent phase he's in, where he has gotten more and more controlled. I mean,
you're right. No, you're right. Here's the thing. I will applaud any artist who pushes themselves to do something different. And in his way, he was like, let's try to be more free. And he didn't quite get it right, or in my opinion, and he didn't quite free himself. You know, like the quote says it all, right? It's like, I'd like to do this if I am able. You know, the quote kind of reads like that. And I'm not sure he was able to let himself get free, but you're right that artists need to take chances, even if they fall flat, because if they don't take chances, you know, how many times can you make the same film, or how many times can you I don't know. Like, I think you need to take chances. So maybe your frustration with his most recent films, is Darjeeling resonates with you because it's someone who has perfected what he's done. We both love Life Aquatic. We both love Royal. We both love Rushmore. And then this is his chance. And you love the imperfections maybe. And for me, they just don't. They're imperfections. They're not as perfect. They're not as good.
Well, you know what else I really love? And I never actually said where I get off on this movie. Where I get off is when we have just gotten through that horribly chaotic prologue with Bill Murray. Yeah. And then Adrian Brody runs into frame, it hits slow motion, and the Kinks start to play. And I just transcend. I leave my body in that moment. And there are a bunch of moments like that in this movie. There's the Rolling Stones sequence at the end where there's all of a sudden we're in this magic realist space where we're in a train that is also all of the world, and there's a tiger there, and Natalie Portman is there.
Yeah.
And the Rolling Stones are playing. There is this level of aesthetic ecstasy that this movie hits every so often, and it's not always to do with classic rock, though it often is. Sometimes it's the way he's using these themes from old movies about India and trying to infuse his thing with sort of the spirit of those things. I think he doesn't know what to do with India. I think he's using India in a probably pretty callous way. I think this is a mean movie, is the conclusion I came to. It's his meanest movie. The characters are
Life
mean
Aquatic's
to each other.
Pretty mean, but there's redemption. There's redemption.
Steve Zissou is mean to his employees, which is horrible.
And these
are three white guys.
He's mean to everybody,
and he's mean to everybody around him. But it's not quite as sort of as vicious as dropping these guys in, and it's a different kind of viciousness.
If this movie was released today, it would read like White Lotus to a sense. Like people would know.
It's a little
people
bit White
would
Lotus.
know that it was these white guys who wanted their dad's Ferrari more than they needed to be at the funeral. Like they like would not trust these characters immediately, and them being white and being in India would make you today, if that movie came out, trust them even less and think of them even less. So in my opinion, it would work even stronger for you at the end of the movie to be like, those guys suck, and so I think, if anything, it just kind of furthers that maybe he had that understanding of that at the time that I maybe didn't have in my consciousness as a college kid in 2007. I mean, I also didn't know the Kinks back then either, really. So these songs were new for me, and they were like, this revivalist classic rock thing that Wes Anderson did. Like, that felt fresh and that felt very, very new. I think now we take it for granted, but yeah, like the fact that so many people found Nico through Wes, like a lot of people found their favorite bands through Wes Anderson for classic rock in a sense, in a similar way where like Garden State kind of like introduced us all to indie rock at the time. Like, I think now it seems so fucking obvious to use the Kinks in a movie, but like at the time, I don't know. I mean, those were songs that sounded to me like instant classics that I didn't really hear on classic rock radio. You know what I mean? Like you would hear Lola, but you wouldn't hear This Time Tomorrow or what else is in it? Strangers.
Yeah, that's the other big one.
Yeah, I don't think I ever heard that song on classic rock. It sounds like a song you knew all your life, and Wes Anderson does that really well. Like, this seems like something I've seen forever. Like, I've always seen this, or like that kind of feeling. Like, it's always been there, and he uses music really effectively in that way.
You don't think of him at this point as like a soundtracky artist, but circa Royal Tenenbaums, like him and Cameron Crowe,
right?
It was, and PTA, those were the guys who were going to curate, and Tarantino were going to curate a soundtrack for you. It was the golden era of discs, CD soundtracks.
And then there's the Mark Mothersbaugh thing too.
Yeah.
Like there was, like musically, Wes Anderson was top of the pops. Like, it was kind of like, oh my God, could you imagine working with Wes Anderson on like the next soundtrack for his next movie? Like, it'd be the greatest job ever, but it's probably just him.
Well, this is maybe a good way to kind of shift into why my closing argument is we're not going to get through the plot of this movie. Good Lord.
No.
You're not listening to this probably if you haven't seen the Darjeeling Limited. If not, you should have watched it. What are you doing?
Agreed.
Because it's a great movie, and why it goes into the time capsule for me, why I think we need a Wes Anderson movie over a Paul Thomas Anderson movie, over a Quentin Tarantino movie. These are guys who are kind of in the same category.
Sorry, and can you really quick name There Will Be Blood as the PTA movie, and what's the Tarantino movie, Death Proof?
It's Death Proof, yeah.
I'm so glad we chose this one.
I think you need one of those guys in there because they are the guys who are... They were the top line talent of 10 years ago. And something that is really interesting that I actually ran across while I was reading up on, the reviews and the interviews and everything surrounding this movie, there was an Atlantic article that came out right around this same time that was complaining about the overabundance of quirk in the media of that time. This American Life had just become a TV show. The Flight of the Conchords was a big deal. Wes Anderson was all the rage, and people were so bothered by quirk, which is something that is a term that is attached to a lot of these guys from the 90s. They were the quirky auteurs, and then this article is framing Judd Apatow as the savior who's going to save us from Wes Anderson, because he's doing these relaxed movies that take place in the real world,
Sure.
and they aren't art directed like Wes
Sure.
Anderson. And then that becomes its own whole overwhelming thing. I think it is fascinating to grab this little slice of a guy who is so influential of that quirk movement, which was coming to such a head in 2007. And he is wrestling with it in this movie. He is saying, I know that I am responsible. This is how I interpret it, at least. Maybe none of this was on his mind, but it reads in the movie for me. I know that I am part of a thing that has become a thing, the Wes Anderson style. And here is me pushing back against it and experimenting with it. I think that's a really exciting sort of tension that is happening within this year. And it is embodied beautifully here. And that is why I am throwing it in the time capsule. And you hear that little ding as the first little thing hits the bottom. There we are. It hit 4 times. It bounced.
Yeah, it's bouncing because nothing else is in there yet.
Yeah, and it
It's a big
made that sound every time. It's amazing. It's a very hard but bouncy thing.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. No, I mean, I'm a big fan of this film, and I think that if I had not, and the thing is, if I did not love his other movies the way that I love them, and I had never seen a Wes Anderson film, and you showed me this film, it would be like probably a top 20 movie for me, you know. So I think it's only because I love Wes Anderson. I think he is one of those filmmakers that, you know, the way I'm going to talk about Animal Collective and Panda Bear, Wes Anderson in film to me is one of the great modern filmmakers. So I go deep and like to have hot takes and be like, Darjeeling, what? Like, get out of here. Like, his other films are, you know, but, you know, if I had never seen one of his films, I would absolutely be in love with all the stylistic, all of his style is in that film. All of his humor is in that film. The directing, the music, it's all there. It's all like a great Wes Anderson film for me. But yeah, at the end of the day, like, I think that I truly just tend to gravitate towards resolution in a strong way, or because there is resolution.
Well, you used the word redemption a couple of times.
I did
here,
because
you
Life Aquatic.
But you seem to think it's unearned, which would deny you as a viewer resolution.
It is unearned. It's unearned. It's unearned, I would say, and I think he knows that. I think as the storyteller, he knows that story is about 3 fucking brats who go to India and have their spiritual experience and see some kid die, and then they're coming back thinking that they just had an India trip. And I think that, and they're going to tell all of their first dates, and Jason Schwartzman's going to tell all the women that he's emotionally unavailable for, and writing shitty stories on the side while being a crappy partner to people. He's going to tell them about this India trip. And then Adrian Brody's going to be a crappy father, and Owen Wilson's going to, I don't know. And that's not how I feel about Life Aquatic. And that's not how I feel about Royal. Like, I could talk about those characters and what they're doing, even the bad ones. I don't know, because there's so much goodness in those films for me.
Well, I think it's maybe worth noting that one of the most significant strains here is a storyteller who is having a real hard time navigating what it means to be a storyteller and to use your own material, and kind of getting sick of your own voice, it seems like.
Relatable. Sure. I get it. So maybe this movie is an exercise in the futility that he was, or like, not that he is, experienced futility. Sorry, that comes across the wrong way, but like that he is feeling frustration with the model that he's set up for himself and the expectations that people have for him. You love that about art, and so do I. When it's like an artist kind of pushed against a wall in some relevant way that relates into the art, and you can kind of feel from the art itself, without even having known the story. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's when an artist gets to the point that they have to kind of figure out what the pivot is.
Yeah, and that leads right into person pitch.
So I am now going to give you a pop quiz. Are you ready for it?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Because we're going to do this every week. And it's not a trivia contest because I don't want to make anyone feel stupid and you're the only one here, so I would have to be talking about you.
No, this is great because I've always wanted to like call in on a radio station and like win tickets, or like I've always wanted to be on the radio, like being like, oh, let me see if I can answer this. And it's like, you only have 5 seconds. How many times can you say the name of our station? That kind of stuff. Like, so I'm on the radio right now. Don't worry about the pressure. I thrive under pressure. Let's do it.
But there's no prize. So I'm sorry, you're not going to win tickets.
If I win, if I get it right, I'm going to buy myself something on eBay.
That's a great way of looking at it.
Cool.
All right. So I'm going to give you 4 stories, short ones. 3 of them are from MSNBC's Most Peculiar Stories of 2007. One is a description of a 2000 episode of the British series Peep Show.
Wait, tell me, what is Peep Show again?
Peep Show is a British sitcom about 2 roommates named Mark and Jeremy.
It was on in 2007?
It was on in 2007. It's a fantastic sitcom. It is unbelievably mean. It is like...
You've seen it all?
Oh yeah, it's one of my favorite shows.
You do retro BBC stuff, right? Like you've seen The Old Office, In-Betweeners.
Oh God, if that's retro, then yes, I do. I have seen all of that.
I've never seen In-Betweeners.
In-Betweeners?
I've never seen Old Office.
Oh, that's great stuff. You should check it out.
Yeah.
Peep Show is also the an earlier project by the guy that now does Succession. So it's an interesting lineage there. Pass. Well, so I'm gonna.
It's like Mad Men.
All you need to know is. We can't get into that. So I'm going to give you these 4 stories, and you just have to tell me which one is
Peep Show,
a sitcom about mean people.
Okay, is it meaner or less mean than Darjeeling Limited?
Peep Show, it is meaner than anything.
Okay.
Okay. So number 1, a woman yelled so loudly at her overflowing toilet that she bothered her neighbor. She didn't back down, so her neighbor, a former police officer, called the police and had her cited for disorderly conduct for yelling too loud at her toilet.
Okay, that's number 1.
Number 1. Number 2, a man in an electric wheelchair was crossing the road when a truck failed to see him and hit the wheelchair at low speed. The wheelchair got stuck in the truck's grill, and the truck pushed the wheelchair for 4 miles. The man was completely unhurt.
All right, that's number 2.
That's number 2. A man confided his doubts about his relationship to his personal trainer and then tried to get the trainer fired when his girlfriend started going to the same gym. And number 4, a man sued his dry cleaner over a lost pair of pants, and the parties were so unable to reach a settlement that the demand eventually reached $65 million for a lost pair of pants.
Okay, I have my answer.
All right, what's your answer?
3.
3? Why do you say 3?
Because I can tell you wrote it.
You can tell I wrote it. I didn't.
Is it 3?
It's 3, but I didn't write that. That's an episode of Peep Show.
I could tell it's a different writer.
Oh, but I wrote all 4 of those.
Oh, wait, really? You wrote all 4? No, because the MSNBC, you probably copy and pasted. Like what happened or the headline.
Let's not get into my process. Good Lord. I'm the game master.
This season of What a Year is brought to you by Mubi, which is, I'm just going to say it, and you're going to hear me say it every episode. They are my absolute favorite streaming service. And look, I know how easy it is to ride the skip ahead button when an ad comes up on a podcast. I do it. I'll admit it. I'm sorry. But I'm going to urge you to actually listen to this one because this is a recommendation that I really, really care about. So let me tell you about Mubi for a second, and then I'm going to tell you about this amazing project that they are doing this summer. So to begin with, Mubi is a curated streaming service. They show exceptional films from around the globe. They premiere a new film every single day. It might be from an iconic director or an emerging auteur, and it's amazing. Every day you get this email with a rundown of that day's movie. It always sounds fantastic, and this is not any sort of algorithmic nonsense. Every movie that they feature is hand-selected, so as they say, it's like your own personal film festival streaming anytime, anywhere. So as for this summer's project, the acclaimed audio documentary series Movie Podcast is back for a second season. This season is focused on movie theaters because, as they say, in a time when too many cinemas are shutting down, it is time to lift them up. So every episode of the season tells some surprising story of an individual movie theater that had a huge impact on film history or even just history in general. And now I am done with the copy that Mubi gave me. So this is just me talking to you. This is such a beautifully produced show. They have interviews with experts, they have music and sound effects and excerpts from great movies, and there's narration from Rico Galliano that is captivating. I just finished the first episode, and I absolutely loved it. This episode tells the story of the Cinémathèque Française, which is where all the French New Wave directors were going before they became the French New Wave directors. So, like, it's where Godard became Godard, it's where Truffaut became Truffaut. And if you don't know anything about the French New Wave, if that just means nothing to you, then you get this perfect primer on what it was and why all of this mattered. But mainly you learn about Henri Langlois, who ran the Cinémathèque, and he was this linchpin figure in French film history. He led like a cinematic resistance during the Nazi occupation of France. But he was also this very controversial figure, and when he got fired from the Cinémathèque, things got explosive and they got bloody, and it all connects directly to the student uprisings of 1968, and it is just such good podcasting. So you can listen to Movie Podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and it's honestly, it has to be one of the best movie podcasts that I have ever heard. And I would be saying that even if Mubi was not sponsoring this show. It's a completely genuine recommendation. But since they are sponsoring the show, now I get to tell you that listeners to What a Year can try Mubi for 30 days completely free at mubi.com/whatayear. That's mubi.com/whatayear. You'll get a whole month of great cinema for free. And seriously, you won't regret it. This is how I found Mubi years ago. I heard an ad on a podcast, and I signed up for the 30-day trial, and I've been a member ever since, and I have been so happy. So seriously, I cannot wait to tell you more about Mubi and all of their great stuff in the coming weeks. But in the meantime, let's get back to the show.
Hey, this next segment is your segment. Do you want to take me through Person Pitch in some way, shape, or form?
Yeah, so let's get into the first 2007 record, which is Panda Bear's Person Pitch. And this record was huge for me at the time. And, I don't listen to it as much anymore, but going back to it for this was, so lovely.
So just let me get this straight to begin with. Panda Bear is a one-person outfit that is spun off of Animal Collective?
Yeah, so Animal Collective has like 4 to 5 members, and they all have their own personas. Like A.V. Tear is this dude Dave, and his name is A.V. Tear, and so that's his name within Animal Collective because they're a collective. And then that's his name when he does solo stuff too. Although he's gone by other things too, right? But Panda Bear was named Panda Bear within Animal Collective.
So Panda Bear is a member of Animal Collective.
Yes.
Who also has a human being name.
Yes. Noah Lennox. And he is an absolute genius, in my opinion. So
well, I get that from hearing the music.
Yeah. So anyway, just I can only really put it in context of mostly who I am and what I experienced. Basically, I saw Animal Collective on their Strawberry Jam tour, and it was like I was like really stoned. And I saw them at the House of Blues with no earplugs, and it was
which House of Blues?
The Boston one.
I don't think I was at that. I was at Animal Collective. Is that the same show?
That was the next one.
Oh, okay.
That was the Merriweather one. That was the not so good one.
Oh, okay. Well, tell us about the good one then.
Well, anyway, so the Strawberry Jam one was life changing. I mean, it was the period of, like I was saying, like modern music for me was the most exciting at that time than it has been probably, since I was a little kid listening to Blink-182 and buying their CDs at the stores. Animal Collective was a big part of that. was a big reason for that. And being able to be, seeing them live while they're coming out with these 3 records specifically, Strawberry Jam, Person Pitch, which is a side project of Animal Collective, but still I very much relate it within this, and then Merriweather Post Pavilion, also Fall Be Kind right after that, was like, in my opinion, the peak of, the best band at the time releasing the best music. And Noah Lennox as Panda Bear had a huge part in that. So he's touring with, so I see this show, mind blown, fan for life. Then Noah, being part of this band, which is very democratic, they all bring songs to the table, they all jam, they all figure it out together. He moves to Lisbon with his family, where he lives when he's not on tour, and he does this record. So his guitar is held up in customs, and he has a sampler, and he has a sampler because he likes Madlib, which is, this legendary hip-hop producer that is incredible, but he has this sampler because he read that's what Madlib used. So he gets it and he starts messing around with it. And now everybody, like a lot of people I know in music, like have one of these machines because of Animal Collective. But anyway, he has one because of Madlib. And his guitar's held up at customs, and he starts working on this new project, right, in his free time. And it becomes sample heavy, but he also is like, kind of like, oh man, like I don't want it to sound too much like the samples. So he has this like artist struggle of like, oh, like I want to use samples because I don't have my guitar, but I also like want to make them weird and different. So he's like gets obsessive on how to make them sound different. And by doing that, it means that he's like layering in this crazy Pet Sounds way.
Can you tell us anything about what it is about this piece of equipment that makes it unique?
So it's like a sampler. What I mean by that is in the sense that I can take like a record or like a pre-existing MP3, and I can bring in a song or a sound into this machine. And when I press the button, it can play like a phrase from that song. Now that can be a phrase from like minute 2 of this instrumental 70s jazz record, or it can be minute 3 from this a cappella Greek 60s Gregorian music. And he uses all of them. So he uses like his record collection kind of like how Madlib would for hip hop, but he applies it to this experimental pop music. And he's doing so in hip hop. It's like, it's the same thing. Like Nas is Illmatic. You sample something, but then you throw enough on top of it where it's like, oh, that was a Michael Jackson sample? Like I didn't even realize that. And that's what Panda Bear's approach here is he's kind of taking things that are existed as music before, but retranslating them and using them as the bare bones to build something completely fresh. So anyway, so for me, I was into hip hop super hard in college. Like probably that's like the biggest time where I was listening to like a lot of early 90s hip hop, specifically like East Coast shit. And so like I was really into sample heavy hip hop already. And all of a sudden my like modern indie shit combined with that. And then also the love of like 60s music, not only because he was sampling a lot of 60s recordings, but he also is arranging vocals in a way that we haven't heard since the Beach Boys and the Beatles, or like that kind of thought. And his voice kind of sounds like Brian's. And it was just like this. And the craziest shit is that Strawberry Jam, the Animal Collective record right beforehand, sounded nothing like this. But then he does this sample heavy record, and then all of a sudden the success from that opens this huge door for the band Animal Collective to achieve what they achieve on Merriweather Post Pavilion because of Noah's ability to go to Lisbon, create this new world, this sunny, beautiful, take a walk in Lisbon and listen to your own music. I'm sure that's what he was doing, just like creating meditation pieces for himself. And then that exploration allowed for Animal Collective to make, in my opinion, the best stuff they've ever made. And Strawberry Jam is mind blowing, but that to me is like the other guy's like true album. Like that's Dave's, that feels like his big thing. And this Person Pitch feels like Noah's big thing, and then Merriweather is like both of their big thing.
And Merriweather is what yielded a disappointing show that I went to with you.
For me, I mean, they had a lot to accomplish live there. They're supposed to sing in perfect like two-part harmony and like play like 6 million instruments at the same time. I mean that, and I've seen interviews with Noah where he's like, dude, shows are, it's miserable. That kind of setup to not have anything organic and like try to navigate that and have like wires unplug and stuff, and I can't imagine. But the performing aspect of that I wouldn't imagine being great, and I don't think was great when we saw it. and that's why Strawberry Jam was amazing, was because they were all on fucking organic instruments, just like playing loud as shit and screaming their heads off. Whereas Merriweather's like this dream world, and so is Person Pitch. But the Person Pitch tours, I don't know if you saw it, but it's like him in like a little tiny setup and then just singing. So I don't know.
And a video kind of going on behind him, which seemed to be a lot of, when I was watching the YouTube video yesterday, seemed like a lot of what the crowd was responding to at times was what was going on up there, because what you were seeing on stage is just a guy standing there. And the use of vocals is fascinating in this album to me, because they're crucial. I've known of this album since 2007, because you've been telling me about this album since 2007, but I didn't really find my way into it until the past couple of weeks, because I looked up the lyrics, and the lyrics are all but inaudible. But when you are actually following what he's saying and what I think the album is about, it unlocked things for me that turned it into more of a journey. And so that makes me kind of like curious about, should I have to do all that work to unlock this thing? Does it work to sort of a mass audience that's not sort of indie?
I love that question. It reminds me a little bit of what I was thinking about when you were providing context for the Darjeeling Limited, and how it, you love the movie because of all this stuff you know about it. And you're like, okay. And I'm like, okay, but like if I was an alien, I was just watching the movie, like would it hit me? Like not knowing that Wes was struggling with that. And like as you're saying, like, how do you love it off the bat if you don't know all this stuff about the history? And I would say my answer for that is actually like a strong case for listening to music in other languages, a strong case for listening to instrumental music, a strong case for being open for pop songs to not necessarily hear the words. And I'm a little lucky in this department because my ears don't work so well with lyrics, and they never have. I'll always kind of know how a song goes before I really know any of the words, unless it's like a chorus that's like, I love you, baby. Like I obviously can hear that, but like verses, specific, like rap, pop, like people will be like, did you hear the words? Like, isn't that so cute? Or like, isn't that so cool? And I'm like, oh dude, like I have no idea what they were saying. Like I was here listening to the drums, or I was listening. And that was Panda Bear for me too, was like realizing that the vocals were there in this beautiful way, but that it wasn't this person being like, here's this story. And that's not what's immediate about it for me. What's immediate about it is the emotion for me, the world that he creates. What's very, very secondary, if not, what is it, tertiary?
Tertiary, yeah.
is the lyrics. And like I said, I'm lucky because that's the normal practice for me. Lyrics are usually tertiary. But we'll have to push it, because lyrics in this case would be like quadriary, if any. No, totally. But what's cool about it to me is you can love this record without that. I can't sing along necessarily. I can sing along to the melodies. I can't sing along to the words necessarily to this record. But when you look them up, they're pretty fucking thoughtful and pretty rad. Like one's about like going off antidepressants, and one's about like he has these very simple, which I think is influential on my own music, like this very kind of simple mantra, kind of observational. Like it reminds me of this lyric on Merriweather, where you can hear the lyrics crystal clear. So if you hear Person Pitch and want more lyrics, check out Merriweather as a next step. The lyrics are crystal clear. The vocals are extremely produced, and you can hear what they're saying. And there's this lyric that is, am I really all the things that are outside of me? And like I can, that could belong on Person Pitch. You know, it's lyrics like that. It's like these like new father explorations of like, you know, and the thing is, he's young. Like when I look back to how young he was in 2007, like, dang, he's like definitely our age, if not younger.
Well, let me read out to you the opening lyrics of this album. Because it's so voicey, and it's all so, like you say, it's mantras and it's pleas. So the opening lyrics to this album, which you would never know if you're just listening to it, just blasting through it. Try to tell me how to do it, only because I'm new to it. Coolness is having courage to do what's right. I'll try to remember always just to have a good time. And if you read it as poetry, it's a whole album of this. It is.
You can hear that one, but there's other ones where it's like, you know, and you're like, what?
Yeah.
But I was used to that from Animal Collective already.
Well, let me give you another one then. Bros, I think my favorite, aside from Comfy
Sure.
and Nautica, the opening
Sure.
track, which I love, I think Bros is maybe my favorite. It is a direct address song. Hey man, what's your problem? Don't you know that I don't belong to you? It's hard and hard enough to keep it up when everything is so new. I'm not trying to forget you. I
Lisbon.
just like to be alone. Come and give
Lisbon.
me the space I need. And
Lisbon. 100%.
Lisbon. Yeah. But it's these songs are so yearning and so emotionally vulnerable. This is some kind of tension between him and
Animal
his
Collective.
bros, presumably. And yeah, it is a, like you say, it's a fatherhood record where you can't tell it's a fatherhood record. It just, I guess it must just be in its bones. It is, because that's where
I think
he was coming
it's
from.
more of a Lisbon record than it's a fatherhood record. I think it's a Lisbon record. I think it sounds like summer in Lisbon, and I think I can hear those mosaic fucking tiles like in the music, and it's like very like beach, like I'm in a band in America. I just bought property in Lisbon and I'm making a record. Like I really need to I need to get behind this decision and disconnect in a lot of ways, because the decision to do that when you're in an American band is very alienating, I can imagine, emotionally, and is also one of those big decisions where you can say like it's not a big deal, like I'm still in the band, I'll be back, like this is just where I'm moving my family, but can feel like a big deal to the people that you're close to in New York or Baltimore or wherever you're living in the States. So I think that isolation is essential in the creation of something, some place that's so new. Like I say it's so Lisbon, but only because I know that. I mean, it sounds like its own place. And that's why I brought up Astral Weeks before. And I think there's plenty of cases for Emma Forever Ago. When you hear it, you were in the cabin. When you hear Person Pitch, where are you? I don't know, but you're somewhere. And there are
Whoa. That was really good. I want to sit with that for a second, because you're suggesting that this is an album about alienation almost, and so it is an alienating record. It's about being nowhere. I love that.
It's a new place for him to feel at home, and that is Lisbon, but it's also this record. And it's those old records that he loves, that he's sampling, that he knows every word to that song that you've never heard before, that he's taking 2 bars from and creating his own music. And I could never do it, and I would have this huge hang up. So yeah, I think, yeah, absolutely. I think like, and that's the thing, like with rock records, is a lot of the times you hear Stones records and you feel like you're in a room with a band, or you hear like a Who record, and the idea is like you're hearing the Who fucking like on stage in your ears.
Well, you're hearing the chemistry of four different brains.
Sure. Yeah. There's like different things, different places. Maybe the albums put your brain in your ears and even your body into. And I think this is one of the top examples for me of music where I'm like, where the hell is this? And what is this? But it's something very distinct, and it's something that like not a lot of no other music can you bring you to that place, and that makes it an album worth revisiting over and over and over again. That place will always exist for you to go visit, and it's something that combines the approach, the production is all this range of influences. The actual vocals are dreamlike, the melodies are perfect. I mean, and it floats by. It's done you fell asleep. Track 2, you woke up with, it's like, it's great. I love it.
Well, it's true that the distinction between tracks is not always very distinct. It just drifts through. So I'm curious if you think that the samples have any greater logic to them than just, these are the records I love. Because you got Enya, and you've got Cat Stevens, and you've got like stuff from the 50s, and you've got the soundtrack to The Thin Red Line. Is there any like, I am creating, I mean, what is the cover of this album? It's just a bunch of sort of
collage
icons put together. It's a little bit Sgt. Peppery, but without being
but I think collage
so.
is important to say because the music is as well. Yeah.
But is it just a collage of, this is what I'm pulling out of my record collection, or is it like, here is some grand stew of the 20th century, or is he not thinking that way? Do you think?
I think that it's there, that there's the outside perspective where I really do believe that he made this record for himself, and then it blew up in a way that he wasn't anticipating. And so for him, I think it was purely an exercise not to say anything to anyone. So in that way, I think, it's the sampling process, which I can't speak to because I don't do it. But I would imagine it would be similar to like, why did Wes Anderson pick that Kinks song? I think like it's a decision that he makes for whatever reason on each song. But I think I don't even think when I heard it, I knew that he was using a sampler. I don't think I knew that those were samples. I don't think I had any idea what the hell was going on. And I think I loved that about it. And now knowing that it's other songs and watching a YouTube video of them showing me what songs they are, it doesn't take anything away from it. Because I hear it and I'm like, what? Like, how did he have that idea from that? And to just create something completely new, he could have taken the samples out. Like, it seemed like a songwriting exercise for him that just happened to be A+. Like, it happened to just click with him in a way that just like was like, oh, I guess that really works for me when I forget my guitar at the airport and have to use this thing. Like it just worked. I don't think he knew that was coming, But then again, he's been a genius forever. Like, his father passed away and he made a record in his dad's house on his piano, like in the weeks like following his death. It's like Panda Bear's always been one of those like next level artists, So it doesn't surprise me at all that this happened with that kind of mind. But it's cool to hear the humanity and the non-alienness too. To feel some emotions in this music. And I think you don't need the lyrics. I think the music carries that.
Can we do the almost redundant exercise of comparing it to Brian Wilson just for a minute?
It doesn't feel redundant because it's true. I mean, he sounds like him.
It's so obvious. I mean, when I say it's redundant, it's like, it's Bros is Sloop John B. It just starts, it might as well be.
Yeah, fair. Yeah.
So is there anything to analyze there, or is it just right there on the surface?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've as an artist who's been dealing with this whole like imitation influence, I think it's always like when the original voice is so much louder than the influence, it doesn't matter anymore that the influence is there. And that's why it makes the samples okay. And that's why it makes it okay that he sounds like Brian Wilson. Because if he sounded like Brian Wilson and he was doing a song that sounded like Sloop John B, which it does in ways, but if he was doing, like if he was dressing up with a surfboard on a Pendleton and had a band, and we'd be like, no, thank you. I mean, it's so many other things before it's Brian Wilson. And the idea that he adds so many effects and like and buries himself vocally just says to me that he's insecure about it from the get-go anyway about it. And like, I've seen performance of his where vocally it's not that strong. So it's like, that's just another instrument. And what he's doing with his instrument, if he sounds like Brian Wilson when he's singing certain things, he also sounds unlike anything I've ever heard a human voice do before.
Oh, completely. And watching him on YouTube, it looks like he's hurting himself.
Yeah. And so therefore, like, yes, the Brian influence is 100% there, but also like his influence on me is 100%. Like, he's just completely innovative in so many ways that it's almost like an afterthought at this point for me. But also a gateway. Hey, your favorite thing about the Beach Boys is their vocal writing? Have you ever heard of Panda? Like, that's fine. I can tell he loves the Beach Boys, and I'm sure he'd be like, no, not really, whatever. But like, yeah, it's obvious. Like, he loves Brian, and why wouldn't you? I mean, and Panda Bear did for me what I'm sure Brian did for people too. I was alive when Panda Bear wrote this record, and Brian didn't write those vocal arrangements, and Brian didn't write those songs. Panda Bear wrote those songs, and those songs are absolutely stunning. So yeah, for me it's worth mentioning, but also worth pushing aside and digging deeper until you can get past it, and then you're like, oh yeah, it's Panda Bear's voice. It just is influenced by Brian.
But do you think it hits the same button for you? Is the appeal overlapping, or
more in the vocal harmonies than it is, and the sense of melody and the sense of nostalgia and the sense of pure, just beautiful falsetto and how to use that in these sustained whole notes that wander around the major scale. And Brian was very, very into that and would write a lot of like falsetto counterpunctal melodies. And you have to understand that, like, yeah, the Beach Boys thing is huge for Panda Bear, but he's also sampling some 1971 jazz record that you like have never heard before. So it's like, you know, there's just so much there that he's referring to that's not Brian. It's just that Brian's the most like well-known reference that he kind of has within his arsenal.
So you said nostalgia. That's another sort of uniting thing here. What is it that makes this a nostalgic record?
You know, I can't put my finger on it. I think he creates a nostalgia that you're yearning for something that never happened. And I think that that's what film does really well too. And a lot of the films that we talk about, he's creating a place that you're like, it has all the vinyl crackles, it has all the progressions of the times that have passed, but it's new at the same time. But it's like, when would then this come out? Or this makes me think of the past, but it's new. And I think that that's why it comes together with the Darjeeling Limited so nicely. Is the fact that you were like, oh, this is his last modern movie, I had to double take for a second, because and Rushmore too, like some of his films, it's like they're timeless. They combine elements, and especially fashion, and
they take place outside time.
His modern films are extremely nostalgic as well, and I think that's where Panda Bear fits in. Is it's nostalgic for a place that I've surely never been to, in a time that surely never existed, but it's like a parallel universe to the American 50s, but in kind of like an alien world.
So now would presumably be the point where you give your closing argument. Is your closing argument everything you've just been saying, which is that this is perfect?
It was for me, and I think that I think I would love to for my closing argument section to hear kind of you, if anything, like as I gush over it. Is there anything that like you didn't respond to, or is there anything that because I kind of poked at that at Darjeeling a little bit like that. Like, you said this wasn't an immediate record for you. Are you like 100% sold on it now? Like, is it a huge record for you now? Are you still wrapping your head around it? Where are you at with this record?
I mean, I think of it as my favorite album. I'll probably not listen to that much. It's something that I so admire it on that sort of cerebral level. And there's a couple of songs, Comfy and Nautica and Bros, are I think incredibly listenable, even though Bros is like 12 minutes long. There's a couple of 12-minute tracks on here. I think the second half, what would be the side two, it loses me a little bit.
It's the nap section.
Yeah, it's.
But you should listen to it on a train or a plane. It kind of floats in. Yeah.
Yeah, I just lose interest a little bit.
Fair.
And I want to listen to something else. But it is taking you through this journey, and the second to last track is called "Search for Delicious," and he takes you kind of into the bowels of some. If you are reading along with the lyrics as poetry, which I was. He goes into these darker and darker and more alienated places and more sort of resistant to other people. I think there's a reference to Mitch Hedberg in there at one point.
Whoa.
I mean, it seems to me, let me look up the lyrics to Good Girls / Carrots.
You found a Mitch reference?
Hold on.
Well, I want you to finish about this, but I also wanted to ask you if you don't mind banking it for also part of this closing thing. As a film guy who was recommended this record somehow by me, you got into it, and then recently realized that your favorite track had a clip of audio as its heartbeat from something that you already loved as a film, and what that experience was like for you. Would love to hear about that, like, because you fell in love again. And what is it like? Does it take away from it? Does it enhance it? Does it take away from the song now that you're like, oh, it was already a thing that I liked? And like, I want to know that, because I know you're not like a huge hip hop guy necessarily. So I'm curious, like, when it comes to pop music, does it take away from the song? Was it beautiful for you to be like, oh my God, and it's also that piece that Terrence Malick used? Like, that's so beautiful that he created something so original that I didn't even realize it was that. Like, where do you fall there?
First of all, the opening lyrics to Good Girl Carrots is, that good old boy Mitch just wanted to tell some jokes. Well, now I'm just trying to play some notes.
No way.
Which it does not sound like on the record. It's all mixed low and you can barely hear what he's saying.
I met Noah Lennox, Panda Bear, once, and I wish that I'd known that he had said that on the record, because I would have asked him. That's a great question.
Well, let's get him on the
He
horn.
was lovely, by the way.
Here's where we're going
Absolutely
to cut in your interview with Noah Lennox. Go.
Yeah, I wish.
All right, now everybody just listened to that, and they really were
Oh, yeah,
impressed
what
by
a great interview.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Noah Lennox.
Oh, my God, he's back.
Yeah, exactly.
I didn't know he was here with us now.
I'm always here.
So you asked that about the sample in the opening track is off the soundtrack to The Thin Red Line. That I just thought was a really cool, like, oh, that makes sense when you said that. What was more exciting to me was to discover that the song I was gravitating to, Bros, had the heartbeat of Cat Stevens in it. And
Yeah, which I still didn't realize. That's amazing. What song?
it's Bros. And
No, what's Cat
okay,
Stevens'
what's Cat
song?
Stevens? I said it so many times. It's fucking Bro. Why aren't you listening to me? I found
What
a
podcast
love.
are we on? Where are we?
What year is
And
this?
Is that a song you knew as intimately as the Terrence Malick?
Absolutely not. But Cat
Oh,
Stevens
okay.
is someone that I love, and
Important
so
to you,
to
yeah.
recognize the lineage in that and go, oh, this is touching a similar button, but it's experimenting, and so it's alienating me, but it's also drawing me closer. To recognize those roots of pop music in what is so abstract, I think was
Sure.
the more exciting sort of aha moment for me.
Sure.
Whereas with the Malick score, it was just, oh, yeah, I just, that's a similar tone. Okay, right, that scratches the itch of why was that familiar?
Yeah, but I think that itch is left unscratched as a whole, and like that feeling of like, why do I know this, or what is this familiar feeling, and why do I miss it, and why do I go back there?
It's creating a tension for you, yeah.
Yeah, and I would argue that you're going to say on this podcast that it's one of your favorite records you won't go back to. I think that this place is worth revisiting because it offers a place that just doesn't exist anywhere else. And I'll say that again, like rock records, I do a lot of rock music in my house, and the records sound like rock music in my house. And it could be this songwriter or that songwriter, and that's what I love it, and that's what I do, and I think that's just so fast. That's what the Rolling Stones did. That's what the Beatles did for a lot of their music. That's the Who, the Zeppelin. There's such a tradition in that, and I belong to that tradition. But this record belongs to a different tradition entirely that exists only because some dude was into hip hop that also like loves the Beach Boys and like started making home demo recordings that ended up being a top 10 record for me of the past probably 20 years. Like, it's insane. So yeah, I think that itch is left unscratched because you can never finally figure out what he's doing. You can never be like, oh, it's the Terrence Malick thing, that's why it's good. Or, oh, he's singing like Brian Wilson, that's why it's good. It's like, you can never scratch it. You can go through all of it, but it's like, that's like Wes Anderson too. You can point out that it's Godard, but does that really take away from it? Because he does 20 million other things in the same scene that are him. So it's like, it feels like a throwaway. And that's, to me, yeah, like Panda Bear's so referential, but so himself. It's beautiful.
It's beautiful. So here's something, which is that I'm thrilled to have on my podcast, our podcast. He's not here. One of my dearest friends, Zosha Millman, who also is somebody that I admire so much and is currently the TV editor at Polygon. Am I saying that right?
You are correct, yes.
And that is amazing. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, however you want to, in whatever way you choose?
Oh boy. Okay. I know Ethan from our days at Brightwell Dark Room. And yeah, I work as a TV editor at Polygon, and I've worked as a journalist for 10, 11 years now, I think. So yeah, that's basically the long and short of it. I don't know.
That's a good long and short of it. Can I ask how old you were in 2007? I'm going to make that part of this because it's worth checking in on.
15.
15. So like, what is 2007 in your mind? Because we've talked a lot on the other parts of the show about how we were in college, and that informs all of our perspectives on all of this.
Oh, man. Well, not to put the cart before the horse or anything, but I mean, my specific memory of the TV show we're here to discuss is like turning on the TV in summer, as you used to do when you just watched cable and would kind of idly find things and have to watch advertisements, and seeing an ad for this and being like, ooh, that looks good, and like setting the DVR to record it and knowing almost nothing about it. And I feel like that's probably one of my few, like, that definitely happened in 2007. Like, I just watched something special. Like, I can date that to a very specific point in time in that year. The rest of it is probably a blur. I think I was switching high schools. Like, yeah, I don't know. I can't necessarily think of a lot of things that were like, oh yeah, that's a 2007 memory for me. Weirdly, aside from the show.
We could talk about Mad Men or switching high schools, so whichever you are prepared to talk about.
I mean, I went to a great high school. We can go along, but maybe we talk about the show first.
Sure. It's weirdly, I feel like I have very specific flashbulb memories of this show premiering too. Like, the advertising was really like eye-catching.
I think I just remember honestly just like watching trailers on what must have been cable at the time. And I can't even, necessarily say like, oh, I was watching like X movie or something. But I think I remember thinking it was a film because it looked so unlike any other TV shows I had seen. And it seemed, I mean, this word has definitely come to mean a different thing in the 15 years since, but it did seem very prestigious in that way of like, I didn't recognize any of the actors as a 15-year-old, but it felt like, oh, these are big names or something like that. Like, yeah. I remember like setting the DVR to record and being like, I can't wait to watch this new movie that's coming out, and then watching it and being like, oh, it's an episode of something.
Yeah, I laugh because I remember John Slattery being in my life already from the short-lived Ed. Did you ever see that one?
No.
My beloved Ed, the one about the bowling alley lawyer.
Is that the one with Zach Braff's older brother from Scrubs?
Yes. And
okay.
Julie Bowen from Modern Family was his high school crush, and John Slattery was his romantic rival.
Okay.
And John Slattery, is there a better word for this than this? He summers near me. John Summers nearby my house. And so I've seen him on the beach, and I finally plucked up the courage and I went over to him and I said, "Excuse me, sir." And I said, I really loved you on, and then I just relished how I knew I was going to trip him up when I said, "I loved you on Ed." And you could just see that thing in his face where he was like, "Thank you, you fucking weirdo." And then I walked away and left him alone for the rest of his life.
That's incredible.
But we're not here to talk about Mad Men as a whole. You very specifically picked one episode.
Yes, I picked the 12th episode, which is the second to last one of the season, called Nixon versus Kennedy. And I guess my main thesis of it is that, well, okay, I mean, rather, my aims of using this episode are that I think about the scene that we're going to talk about in a second all the time. And it's kind of the preeminent Mad Men scene in my mind, despite there being, a gold rush of any sort of, you could pick almost any episode and find some sort of scene that knocks most shows out of the water. So there's this scene, all season we've been leading up to Don Draper isn't who he says he is. He has this alternate identity, Dick Whitman, that he seems to be running away from. He has this brother. It's this whole kind of mystery box driving the show. Not necessarily, but it's kind of the undercurrent that would drive a lot of shows, particularly of the time. And this is the scene where Pete Campbell, who's not really his rival, but certainly an antagonistic underling to him, finds out about his secret, goes to his boss to basically try to blackmail his way into a job. When Don doesn't give him the job, he goes to the next boss, Bert Cooper, and kind of spills the whole beans. And Don is playing it very cool, but is clearly very panicked. And in the scene, Cooper, the boss, just goes, "Who cares?" And it's this great, like, bubble popping moment of, like, the whole season there's been this kind of weirder show that's it's a lot of, a lot of Mad Men, but I think it's kind of bursting in through the seams of this kind of more standard show that has kind of these like wink nudges about the fact that it's set in the 60s and all these things we know now as a modern audience. And
season 1 in particular is very, very dense with those. I noticed on the rewatch.
Yeah,
they
totally
taper off as they go, but it's overwhelming at the beginning.
Yeah, there's so many of just like, we don't have a machine that makes perfectly identical copies or whatever. And it's like, okay, yes, we know.
Or what is it? Sally runs in wearing a dry cleaner bag on her head, and her mom yells at her for like messing her hair up or something. And we're like, oh, but she could suffocate, and they don't know that.
They don't know that.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think, there's so many ways in which this show was kind of, like most first seasons are, kind of trying to be something a little more standard than it actually is. And this was a great moment of just like, we're going to do away with that concept entirely. And it really sets up the tension for the entire show, both on this kind of macro level of what the show is in the grander scheme of TV, but also just in the very micro level of like, this is how we are going to write and understand the character of Don Draper.
Okay, I want to hear more about that, because that's not where I was expecting that sentence to end. So how we're going to write Don Draper? Tell me what your perspective is there.
So I think that a lot of this episode is about kind of setting up and then upending the expectations. So like, the episode is called Nixon versus Kennedy, and it is literally framed around the election of the year between Nixon and Kennedy. And that tapers off as the episode gets more crowded with kind of the interpersonal stuff. But there's a lot of that, like, almost every plot point that gets kind of pitched in this is not groundbreaking in the kind of grand scope of the show. Like, we have this whole after hours thing where everybody who's not a higher up stays to watch the election results and just gets absolutely shit-faced and like ruins the office. And like, we find out about 2 secret affairs between office mates there are 2 revealed affairs that we just kind of never really hear about again.
So is that, you're talking about Harry and Hilda? Or
Harry and Hilda.
And
Joan and
Sal? No.
No.
Well, they had their kiss, yeah, and I was...
Yeah, and she realizes, no, it's what is his name? He's the guy who wrote the play or whatever that they're putting up.
Paul Kinsey, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And yeah, it's just sort of acknowledged that at some point in the past they slept together, and we just move on. Like, it just never really comes up again. And it doesn't come to define their relationship. It doesn't change anything. I think that it all gets at this idea that, nothing in this show is going to be as simple as a dichotomy of good or bad or important or not important. And you start to understand that every character is written in this way where, kind of like that saying, like, you never know the journey people are on or whatever, like, be nice to people because you don't know what they're going through. Like, every single interaction has these layers of what each character is bringing to it that maybe the other characters don't know, but we do. And it works. Like, there's just no other way to put it. Like, it's just an incredible, the way like Pete deals with the way Pete deals with Peggy, the way Peggy deals with Don, the way Don deals with Pete, and then all of this kind of feeds on itself until we get to this moment where Bert Cooper just kind of pops the bubble and totally, it's not this big, even show-defining secret for Don anymore. It just comes up every once in a while as something where he's like, I don't want a background check by the federal government because that would be bad. But other than that, it's just kind of a thing in his life that he is dealing with. And I think we understand in that moment that he gets what he wants. His secret doesn't get him arrested for being a deserter or anything like that. But he doesn't get what he needs. Elsewhere in the episode, he runs after Pete first tries to blackmail him. He runs off to his mistress, and he tries to get his mistress to run away with him. And that's
we're talking Rachel Menken is this
yes.
mistress, because he has multiple in this season as well.
That's true. I had forgotten that until I I don't remember which one I thought was the main mistress of the season. I think I just don't hold them in my head at the same time. But yeah, you know, he runs to Rachel and he's basically like, let's run away together. Let's start over. And she starts to realize that whatever she was kind of nursing for him, he is not thinking about it. He's not planning. And she completely, you know, she has him dead to rights. Like she says, you're not interested in running away with me. You're just interested in running away. And that is the character of Don Draper. And I think some, if not all of the tension of the entire show is built on the idea that he will always try to be better than that. And he always probably won't be. And as early as the very next episode of the season, we are already getting into the like, but maybe he could be better than that. And it's like, probably not. No.
Probably not. It's one thing that I really love about how John Hamm plays this character is that he plays the cool Superman of it all, and he does play the sweaty, pathetic guy who is trying to be a Superman, which is extremely effective and to his credit, and points to all of the sort of versatility he was going to show later on things like 30 Rock and in Bridesmaids, where he is secretly hysterical and just also happens to look like, what is it on 30 Rock, the prince from The Little Mermaid.
yeah, Prince Eric. The way he goes from like completely like beautiful rock of a man that projects nothing and is just cool and composed to just sort of this like deflating tube man face where he just kind of lets his whole face crumple. It's like, it was really shocking rewatching it how good he is just right off the bat at exactly what the character needs to be.
I'm just imagining now one of the like waving inflatable arm guys from the car dealership just going down.
Don Draper's face just like.
So you mentioned the term mystery box, which this show, like weirdly, I was looking back because one thing that I love is that this 2007 was like, I don't know if it was peak TV recap, but it was definitely like TV recap
close,
culture
yeah.
was a huge thing in a way that it is a little bit less so now. And reading Alan Sepinwall's reviews from, I mean, God, this is when he was just writing for his blog, What's Alan Watching, a blog that I read religiously in this time. And is now the TV critic at Rolling Stone, and I think a great writer. It is so funny to see the way that people are trying to turn the Who is Dick Whitman into talking about it the way that we talked about Lost at that time, the way Jeff Jensen was writing at Entertainment Weekly and trying to like figure out the little clues. And I think something that you mentioned was that this is an intentional or I don't know if it's intentional, but it is a significant deflation of that tendency. And do you think that sort of indicates the direction the show is going to go, or it certainly feels like it teaches us how to watch it?
Yeah, I think it's like you say, I can't say if it was intentional in the terms of kind of rebuffing the way so much TV was being talked about as like the only reason you would watch this is because there is a mystery and we need to figure out what that mystery means. But I do think it is very instructional about how we watch it. You know, we go immediately from we go immediately from both of the scenes, both of the confrontations with Pete into flashbacks that Don had from his time in Korea.
Korea, yeah. That's
Korea,
his war, as Roger says. That's your war.
Yeah. So we go to flashbacks of him in Korea, and, you know, the one of him getting the Purple Heart, and it's just him lying in bed. It's an extreme close up of his face, basically. And like he is being, I don't think he says a single thing in the scene. I think they just give him the Purple Heart and they talk about how Dick Whitman is dead and, you know, you should accompany the body home. But you don't see, you know, it's very intentional about disassociating you from kind of the powers that be that bestowed it on him. And it's cutting between that and his present life. And it's kind of this, like, all this enigma that was built up in the first episode of him looking at his Purple Heart or having war flashbacks while he takes a nap or something, and kind of even the idea of like, okay, we understand that he went from being Dick Whitman to becoming Don Draper. Maybe he killed someone. It's like, no, the whole story is way more boring than that. It's not interesting. It's it's very sad, you know, both in kind of the filmmaking of the scene, but also just the story of it.
It's sad and it's pathetic and it's just sort of embarrassing.
Yeah, exactly. Like the death is not, it's not something where, you know, the real Don Draper is like, take my dog tags or something. Like he just kind of accidentally blows up this guy he was working with, and that's it. And then he just wanted to get the hell out of Dodge.
It's then this all culminates in the scene on the train where, speaking of on the nose writing, the woman says to him, what is it? You've got your whole life ahead of you. Forget about that boy in the box. Mm-hmm. And all I could think was like, man, you can really get pretty far with the most on the nose writing possible if you happen to have this level of acting and directing behind it.
Yes. There are so many scenes. Like, I mean, I was also thinking about that one, how she like puts her hand on his hand and is like, let's get the soldier a drink. And you kind of have this, I don't know, it feels almost cliche in terms of how many origin stories we've gotten in the 15 years since that are just like so on the nose of like, he turned away from this great tragedy in his life to the arms of a woman. And now we see why he does this every time there's a problem or whatever. But it's like, truly, you can get away with it if the rest of the writing is just that tight.
Yeah, well, it reminds me too of so often this feels to me like a short story that you would read in the New Yorker. Every episode of Mad Men feels like one of those. And John Cheever, a huge influence on the show. But that ending specifically, the let's get the soldier a drink, and the sort of sad man falls head over heels into just bed with a woman for no real reason, except that he looks like John Hamm, which certainly helps. I'm fascinated by the concept of like the New Yorker short story and why it is that. Are you familiar with the Man in the Gray Flannel Suit, the movie or the book?
I don't think so, no.
It's a novel that was then turned into a movie with Gregory Peck and are basically like a template for Mad Men. And in the introduction to one of the reprintings that I was looking at, because I looked at so many reprintings of this novel. I picked up one reprinting and read the introduction by Jonathan Franzen. And he claims that Connecticut in the 50s is as evocative a literary setting as Charles Dickens' London, which I don't think is necessarily true. But I think is this fascinating idea that this is this essentially American landscape. And I love all the stuff in this season that is so specifically pre-Vietnam, like the very idea, like Pete thinks that he has one over on Don just by sort of being able to tell Cooper that he's a deserter, because what in 19 whatever year we're in, what could possibly be more universally, you know, loathed than somebody who doesn't fulfill their military duty? And I want to talk about Pete Campbell for the rest of my life.
God. Talk about Pete Campbell.
He establishes this archetype here that I love and I think about all the time, which is the season 1 villain. It's a term that I have used in my life more than I probably should. It's just this idea of he is the problem in this season, and he doesn't get sort of swept away. He just sort of is dealt with and then becomes an uneasy ally and is still there the whole rest of the season, the whole rest of the series, and is just sort of like the lingering awareness of the threat he once represented is there, but he's also now just part of the fabric. I see that in my life, probably to a greater degree than I should admit. I talk about this with my wife's work all the time, is if she has a new coworker who is causing a problem, I'm always like, that's a total season 3 villain. Because you had your season 1 and 2, and
they're on notice.
Is Pete on notice in the rest of the series? I can't really sort of track the rest of the arc at this point in my head.
No, and I think one of the strongest proofs of that is probably, I can't remember if he might be partner at this point in the show, but I think it's season 4 or 5 when they're up for like a government contract, and that's the one where Don does not realize that Pete has basically put them up for this contract, and then that would mean getting a background check by the government. And when he finds out, he goes to Pete immediately and says, like, we need to stop this. And basically he has, you know, he's not blackmailing Pete really. He's using his kind of, usual gravitas to be like, put this to bed. I don't care how it gets done. And it ends up with them just kind of withdrawing from the contract. And Pete's salty about it, but he does it. You know, he doesn't, as soon as he realizes the hot water Dawn would be in, he realizes it's not at all worth arguing about beyond just trying to figure out the easiest way to keep this contract alive, which they can't. And I think that is a very, like you say, it's a perfect outgrowth of their relationship as it's been set up, which is mostly antagonistic, or at least not one with a lot of respect on either side, to just go into Pete kind of acknowledging that he's lost the war, but that he doesn't hope to lose Dawn in the process, and that he recognizes that Dawn is still a very important person in his life.
Well, and it would be so easy to just get rid of him. But instead, they find a way to keep integrating him. And they're going to get rid of Paul Kinsey. I can't remember how many of the rest of the guys stick around. But, you know, as we make way for all of the other amazing characters that are going to come down the road, it just feels so true to life to me that Pete is just there and you just have to keep dealing with him. Yeah.
And that's something that Cooper encourages him to do. You know, he says, like, fire him if you want, but I'd keep an eye on him, because I think he says, one never knows how loyalty is born, which is just, you know, it's this perfect kind of shrug delivery of like, I mean, do what you want. But Cooper has this kind of, he's incredible. I love him.
I was going to say every line delivery he gives is incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's this perfect culmination of this character who could just be a side character, who could just be kind of one note, but instead he becomes this guy who we come to understand is driven almost entirely by the bottom line, but not in a boring way, which I think is something you don't often get to see. So, you know, he's rooting for Nixon pretty hard, but by the end of the episode, he's like, yeah, we'll work with Kennedy. It's not a big deal. We'll just move forward with that. And he's basically encouraging Dawn to do the same, of just like, I recognize that you were in this room and you make me money, so it doesn't really matter what else you've done, what else, you know, what wars you've deserted or anything like that. And he encourages Dawn to just kind of see Pete Campbell the same way, where it's like, you can just see him as somebody you work with, and that's it.
So one thing is, I can't figure out what Nixon versus Kennedy represents here. Like, who is supposed to be Nixon and who is supposed to be Kennedy? Do you have a take there?
I think the beauty is that it doesn't map perfectly, right? Like, in an episode that kind of upends all these expectations and dichotomies, that, like, we know Don has said that he likes Nixon probably for a lot of reasons, but, you know, the one that he gives his coworkers is that he sees himself in Nixon because Nixon built himself. And, you know, he's like 4 years after he got out of the military, he was vice president or whatever. And I don't remember if he says it explicitly, but he basically kind of levies the same Kennedy critique at Pete Campbell, where he's like, you didn't work for anything, your name got you in here, you're just kind of born with the silver spoon in your mouth, and now here you are, so I'm calling your bluff. And I think, you know, the fact that the victory doesn't shake out as kind of neatly as those lines would say is probably something, again, that it's not too hard to map on to kind of like the grander scope of what we know Richard Nixon went on to do in his life in terms of becoming president, but also the fact that nothing fits as neatly into these boxes that we hope it does.
Well, and Pete is the only one who is able to predict what Kennedy actually represents a couple episodes earlier as they're having the meeting. And yeah, I don't know. It seems so tempting to just make it Don is Kennedy because he won, or Pete is Kennedy because he is younger. And it's like you say, it's not that simple. And the show would rarely go for what is the simplest way out of any situation and any sort of narrative. And even the finale in its way, it's not as sort of famously confounding, the series finale, not as famously confounding as The Sopranos, but it's not that far off just in terms of giving us something to never quite know what to make of.
Absolutely. And I think to your earlier point, a lot of that kind of like wink, wink, nudge, nudge about it being 1959, 1960 is kind of, once again, in this episode, encapsulates kind of this sea change within the show of like this big, huge thing that we've been building up to all season in terms of the election and the ad buys and all these different political things gets ceded over to the interpersonal conflict of everybody in the office. And we care more about just the characters we are watching than we do about watching them play out against this kind of grand operatic political machine that they've been just certainly a part of. But it's not an issue. You know, as Cooper says, he's like, I don't know who won yet, but if Kennedy won, that's that. Well, back to the drawing board.
What a good character.
What a good character.
So there is an exercise that I was hoping that we could go through, which is ranking the junior executives, the Harry, Ooh. Ken, Paul. And I guess we can throw Pete in the mix, but he feels like a different category. So
yeah, that's fair.
Harry, Ken, Paul, where do you go?
Okay. I mean, it's hard to rank them in a vacuum, but it's one of those weird things about rewatching where you're carrying all the future baggage that's vague with a character compared to the thing you're watching now. So it's like first season Ken sucks, but I know he gets to be a better guy. So I feel like I always kind of am like, he's okay. I don't know. I'd probably rank him first.
For one
they
thing.
all suck. I know, but that's the thing. But like everybody else annoys me later on in that way where I'm like, I cannot be like a neutral person about Harry because he just irks me to no end. Yeah. And I find Paul kind of like boorish, but Ken, I'm like, oh, he marries that nice girl and he writes stories and that's just what he does. For the Atlantic, is that the one he lands in this season?
I think it's the Atlantic in this season, yeah, which is just presented as so frustratingly easy. I remember watching this as somebody who was just starting to write and feeling exactly the way Pete does when that happens. So you say Ken first.
Probably, yeah. I know that I should probably put Harry next because in the first season, he's like a nicer dude, but like I feel like I'm just more interested in I like quiet moments in TV shows. So like, you know, the moment that Paul has with Joan where it starts as just kind of this thing we don't understand and then, you know, with one line or just kind of a quick little thing that's not even really fully addressed becomes this like beautiful little backstory you can build up in your brain. I'm like, I just like that. I just like seeing him as this full human as opposed to Harry, who's just kind of, he's whatever.
Okay.
He likes TV. I can respect that.
So it's Ken, Paul, Harry for you.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. I was just in the bag for Harry in the first season, and that always has sort of carried over for me. And I can't remember yet where he goes. I only rewatched the first season for this conversation. And I'm probably going to go watch season 2 premiere right after we're done with this. Because
I was like, wait, maybe I should just jump ahead to like season 6 and 7 because I don't really remember those. And I don't know if I want to watch the whole show. And then I was like, well, if I'm going to watch season 6, I should watch 5. And if I'm going to watch 5, I should watch 4. And then I was like, I guess I should just start at 2.
Yeah. Well, and this was the show that we were all rewatching at the beginning of the pandemic, right? And I didn't do it then. So as we go into year 3, maybe it's time to just loop back around.
Bleak.
It is bleak. So to talk about things that aren't bleak, Mad Men. So this is the episode, and it's not the finale. I feel like a lot of people would pick the finale as their sort of because it's got the carousel
scene
monologue and all of that. So it's this one for you because of the scene in Cooper's office. Do you feel like this has any kind of influence going forward, this episode, on, I don't know, maybe we kind of covered this already, but maybe my greater question is, what is the legacy of this show at this point, 15 years later?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no real, like, when you asked me to pick a show from 2007, I made this list of kind of these shows that personally were interesting to me and, more also shows that were interesting to TV. And Mad Men, it wasn't the only show at the center of that Venn diagram, but it's probably the most prominent, right? Like, you can't get around what's happened to TV in the last 15 years without mentioning Mad Men. And the fact that it comes right on the heels of The Sopranos, but it comes to cable right on the heels of The Sopranos, is a huge, huge shift. And it's not, certainly by no means, the first show to not get bonkers ratings, but also be a critical darling. But its cultural footprint is so outsized compared to who actually watched it when it was on. I can't think of another show that had low enough ratings that nobody outside of the fandom necessarily thought about it in this way, but that also had like a Banana Republic clothing line.
Did it? I don't remember that.
Yeah, it was like there was a huge, it's a chicken and egg situation, depending, I think, on who you talk to, about like whether the 60s were popular because Mad Men was in the zeitgeist along with some other things or what. But 60s clothes, 60s fashions were back in the swing of things, and so Banana Republic just capitalized on this, and you could see it in like they like explicitly had it in their window as like the Mad Men collection and stuff.
Because we all just want to be,
yeah, exactly. It was all a lot of like boring office grays, but
right.
in that kind of vaguely 60s style. So you were like, ooh. Again, even as somebody who did not have to dress for an office, I was like, should I? No.
As a 15-year-old?
I wasn't 15 when the collection came out, but
okay.
I was not a ton older. That's another thing that it's like, I can't give you a year of when that happened. I can just tell you, like, I was definitely not needing to go into an office. But yeah, I mean, it's incalculable, I think, the way Mad Men has shaped both modern TV's landscape in terms of what people are trying to do and what people conceive of as possible, but also what viewers expect of TV. Like, it's TV that demands your attention, not because you're trying to solve this greater mystery about a smoke monster, not to deride Lost, but rather because you just want to see every little detail,
There's a Chuck Klosterman quote that I have always found really fascinating about this show, and I still, every time I watch an episode, I try to like map this onto it, and I always struggle. But I like that he said, it uses symmetrical symbolism in a way rarely attempted on television. Every plot point is mirrored by a minor, less overt storyline in the same allegorical vein. Which I don't know that I could point to that in any episode, but it gets to what I like about the show, which is that it one of the things I like, so many things about this show, but that the episodes feel self-contained, and it does have that sort of things are working in concert together, and it doesn't have the sort of drift that so much does now in the streaming era, where the episodes are meant to just sort of roll into each other. Like, the episodes are discrete units, and the storylines are thematically talking to each other, and I like that a lot.
Yeah, and I mean, to get at one of the questions you had before, I think the carousel moment, it's an all-timer. It's the sort of thing that if you can write one of those, you're just like, I'm done, I did it. But it's surprising because it feels so big that he landed it, like that he landed such a big moment. And I think what I like about this little beat in Burt Cooper's office in Nixon versus Kennedy is just that it is so small and it is so contained, and that it doesn't rock the world of the show in these kind of obvious ways, but it does, as you said, teach you how to watch the show. And kind of, I like when things surprise me for being actually surprising and not just kind of being like literally awesome.
Well, I feel like we just brought it right back around to where it needs to be. So we should call it there, maybe. Can you do the thing that people do at the end of podcasts where they tell people where to find you?
Yes. So you can find my work on polygon.com, specifically in the TV section usually. And you can find me on Twitter at Zosha M, all one word. And if you can't or don't want to find me at those places, you can just Google me, because my name's Zosha. I'm not that hard to find.
True. Well, thank you so much for doing this. This has been fantastic. I knew we were going to go too long, but we went too long, and I feel like we could have gone a whole lot longer. So I appreciate this.
Thank you for having me.
Yes.
This was so much fun. Of course.
What a Year is produced by me, Ethan Warren, with original music by my co-host Ryan Pollie. Thanks to Brian Rosemeyer for the mixing and mastering, and Shane Butler and the good folks at Portray Me for our artwork. Please take a few minutes to follow us on your podcasting app of choice, and while you're doing that, if you could leave a quick rating and a review, it really does make a difference. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at What a Year Pod. On our next episode, we're going to be talking about Hot Rod and Dan Deacon's album Spider-Man of the Rings, plus the webcomic Achewood with guest Branson Reese. It's going to be a good one.